When I found out I was the original villainous spouse in a novel, my wife and I had already been hitched for 2 years. The book's plot revealed that in another 6 months, I'd have to step aside for her. During those 6 months, I'd keep messing things up while also pushing forward the romance between the main male and female characters. Every morning, just like clockwork, I'd whip up my lovely wife's favorite sandwich and brew some hand-ground coffee. After handing her the bag and keys, I'd watch her leave through the door. Standing there, watching her car fade into the distance, a sudden realization hit me, bringing back everything I'd forgotten. It was like a sudden flash of insight, an epiphany. Here's the deal. 25 years ago, I was reincarnated into the world of this book, carrying memories from my past life. At first, I had no clue I was inside a book. It wasn't until this guy with a big grin said, "Baby, we finally have names. We're called Bill Wong," that things started to click. David gently added, "Willow, what do you think?" I realized David Wong was my dad, and Willow must be my mom, Bill. Kind of cheesy, right? The name Bill sounded familiar, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just a common name. 3 years later, Uncle Lou next door had a baby girl. That little girl was super cute, like a tiny doll. So my dad chimed in, "Check out Susan, she's a perfect match for our Bill. Old Lou, how about setting up a marriage between our kids?" I didn't catch Uncle Lou's reaction. My mind was stuck on the name Susan. Susan Lou. Suddenly, it all made sense. Isn't this a character from the book I read before being reincarnated? It was a strong female lead romantic novel. Typically, these stories have a strong female lead and a sweet romance subplot. In that book, the strong woman was Susan Liu, a no-nonsense, tough CEO. The sweet romance was Mike, a cheerful and promising intern. A newbie at work, he faced countless setbacks and challenges, but he stayed positive and hopeful. His persistence made the CEO see him differently. She didn't just overlook his mistakes, she actually helped him out a lot. Over time, her initial curiosity about Mike turned into genuine affection, sparking a romantic love story between them. And of course, to keep things interesting, there had to be some clueless elements. Enter Dill, the clueless element. Dill and Susan were childhood friends, engaged as kids, and married as soon as they were old enough. Dill loved Susan deeply, but Susan saw her feelings for Bill more as family than romantic. Before Mike came along, Susan didn't even know what love was. Her career and love life seemed scripted, and she was just going through the motions. But Mike's arrival was like a burst of sunshine, breaking the stillness of a stagnant pond and igniting a passion in Susan she'd never felt before. However, they kept things innocent. Despite the romantic tension, they never crossed any moral lines. To move the plot forward, that's where Bill comes in. As her husband, he quickly noticed Susan's odd behavior and, after some digging, found Mike. Then he started all kinds of harassment and bullying towards Mike. Surprisingly, his actions didn't harm Mike, but instead made Susan realize her true feelings for Mike. At this point, I just want to say, nice one. With every move Bill made, Susan grew to dislike him more, even asking for a divorce. Bill refused and went as far as having Mike kidnapped, trying to ruin him. This pushed Susan over the edge, leading her to use her own powerful tactics to bring down the Wong family and ultimately destroy Bill using his own methods. Dill died quietly and unnoticed. Susan and Mike ended up living happily ever after, even having twins. Happy ending. Damn it. When I realized I was in a book, I had one rule: cherish life and stay away from Susan. And that's exactly what I did, until she turned 3. Before Susan turned 3, I made sure to show respect by keeping my distance, avoiding her, staying away, shedding tears, and determined to be the most familiar stranger to her. But fate had other plans. It was working against me. Even our parents thought we weren't a good match. But destiny insisted on messing with me. When Susan was 3 and I was 6, I took a fall and hit my head. After that, I forgot everything about being in a book. My eyes and heart were only filled with Susan's adorable face. For the next 22 years, I became Susan's biggest fan, protecting and spoiling her, never letting her get hurt. And she accepted it all, never pushing me away. This only made me more arrogant. Eventually, we walked into the marriage hall, or rather, the grave. Standing outside the villa, I grabbed my thigh hard, tears streaming down my face. Damn it, seduced by her beauty. Inside the villa, the elegant sandwiches and steaming hand-ground coffee were still on the living room table, untouched. Looking back, starting 4 days ago, Susan suddenly stopped eating the breakfasts I made. Her excuse was, too early, not hungry. I didn't think much of it and kept making her breakfast every morning. I always thought, maybe she'll be hungry today. What if she's hungry and has nothing to eat? But now, with my memories back, I finally get it. It wasn't that she wasn't hungry. She was saving her appetite for the breakfast Mike brought her at work. Mike said morning coffee was bad and sandwiches lacked the warmth of home. Mike said, I love soy milk and deep-fried dough sticks, and I also make my own millet porridge. Susan, try some. SSS who. I love soy milk and deep-fried dough sticks, and I also make my own millet porridge. Susan, try some. SSS who. I took a deep breath, feeling a sharp pain in my heart. What should I do? Sitting at the dining table, chewing on the sandwich I made felt like biting into Max. Damn it, the heavens are unjust. If I had always remembered being in a book, I wouldn't have gone near Susan knowing she'd fall for someone else in the future. Yet here I am, still involved with her. Wouldn't that be self-torture? If I had just transmigrated into the book now, I'd have immediately filed for divorce, cutting ties with Susan and all the messy affairs. But after 22 years of loving Susan, my love for her is real. Susan is special to me. I always believed Susan loved me, even if it wasn't as deep as my love for her. I was still unique to her. That's why I chased after her for so many years. Now you tell me she doesn't love me and has found true love elsewhere. What do you want to do? Kill me? At that moment, the housemaid opened the door and walked in. Seeing me, she asked, Sir, what would you like for lunch today? I'll go buy groceries. Suddenly, an idea struck me. I stood up abruptly. Butler Sophia, make some dishes that Madam likes. I'll go to her company at noon. Okay, start preparing. I'm going out for a while. All right. I drove away from the villa straight to the hospital. Susan's period was a week late this month. I hadn't paid much attention since her periods were always irregular. But with my memories back, I remembered something. In the original story, Susan had a child, but Bill didn't know. One time, Bill went to find Susan at the company and saw her helping Mike with his tie as soon as he walked in. In reality, there was nothing between them. It was just Mike's first time wearing a suit and not knowing how to tie it. Susan, who often helped me with my tie, assisted him out of habit, but Dill didn't know. Dill went crazy, rushing to hit Mike. Susan protected Mike and was pushed away by Bill. This push caused Susan to lose her child. Dill was devastated, thinking he had hurt Susan and almost committed suicide. But he didn't know that Susan didn't want the child in the first place. I drove steadily to the hospital. Susan and I had been married for 2 years, but always used protection. We agreed not to rush into having kids. I didn't know what Susan was thinking. For me, I just wanted a few more years together as a couple. Soon, I arrived at the hospital, feeling numb. I went straight to the gynecology department. Unsurprisingly, I saw Susan. I watched her waiting for her number, seeing the doctor, paying fees, undergoing exams, and waiting for results. The whole process took 2 hours, during which my mind was blank. I watched Susan leave the clinic holding the lab results. She was silent for a long time, then tore the paper into pieces and tossed them in the trash can before leaving. The cigarette between my fingers fell to the ground. I didn't snap out of my daze until I reached the hospital entrance. Watching people come and go outside, I took a deep breath and drove back. 22 years of love, 2 years of marriage, and a child on the way. I don't want my life to be doomed by the book's plot. Susan, please, don't let me down. Back home, Sophia had already prepared the meal. She was packing it into containers and said with a smile, It's rare to see such loving couples like you and Madam these days. It makes me envious. Normally, I'd smile back happily, but at that moment, I couldn't even muster a smile. The villa was a half-hour drive from Susan's company. When I arrived at her company, it was exactly noon. The receptionist recognized me without telling anyone. I went straight to the private elevator and reached the 32nd floor without any issues. The first person to see me was Alex, Susan's assistant. His face stiffened for a moment upon seeing me, a flash of panic in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. "Sir, why are you here?" I smiled lightly. "Where's Susan?" Alex said, "The president is in her office. I'll notify her." I pulled him back. "No need. I'll go myself. I haven't been to Susan's company often, but I know the way." Walking to the president's office, I gently pushed the door open. The office had excellent lighting. At noon, bright sunlight streamed through the clean, clear windows, filling the room with light and warmth. Against the light, I saw a man and a woman sitting at the desk with cute cat lunchboxes in front of them, sitting close together, eating their food happily. They both seemed to be chatting and smiling. The woman looked up, listening attentively. Maybe it was the sunlight, but at that moment, the woman seemed extraordinarily gentle, a gentleness I'd never seen before. Afraid I might be mistaken, I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the scene. Click. I clicked my tongue lightly. Damn, I forgot to turn off the sound, disturbing the moment. Damn it, both of them seemed surprised by my appearance, their expressions stunned for a few seconds. Seeing the look on Susan's face amused me, and I couldn't help but laugh. Susan frowned at me, clearly displeased with my arrival. "Oh, Sus, that really hurts." Mike's face turned pale, and he suddenly stood up. His movements were too fast, causing the soup container next to him to spill completely. Ow. The soup splashed onto his leg, burning him and making him scream. Susan quickly stood up, pulling him back. I turned and left, unwilling to witness what happened next. After all, we're all dignified people. I don't want to do anything undignified like in the original story. Alex stood behind me, looking nervous. I shoved the lunchbox into his arms. "Here, you can have it." Alex looked bewildered. I didn't leave, but went to the secretary's office. As I entered, several secretaries stood up, seemingly knowing who I was. "That's good. Saves me from explaining." "Who is Joel?" I asked. A meticulously groomed man stepped forward, trembling with fear. "Sir, it's me. What can I do for you?" I took out my business card from my bag and handed it to him. "I'm very interested in what you have. Remember to contact me." Joel looked stunned. By the time I left the secretary's office, Susan was already standing outside. I masked my emotions and brushed past her with a blank expression. But she wasn't ready to let me go. She grabbed my hand and asked, "Why are you here?" I said, "Let go." Maybe my tone was too cold, as I'd never spoken to her like this before. Susan tightened her grip on my hand. "Bill, don't make a scene." I sighed. "Susan, let go. I don't want to talk to you right now." Susan's face turned ugly, her eyes burning with anger. I met her gaze without backing down. I, Bill, have never been a patient person. The only reason I was gentle with her was because I loved her. Now I realize it's no longer necessary. I pried her hand off and left the company without looking back. After leaving, I didn't go home but checked into a hotel. Joel didn't disappoint. He contacted me just an hour and a half later. In the original story, Joel was a minor character, confident in his looks, which made him somewhat arrogant. So when Mike caught Susan's eye, Joel was incredibly jealous. Joel was the first to notice the ambiguous relationship between Mike and Susan. Driven by various complex emotions, he took photos of all their intimate moments. These photos ended up in Bill's hands and triggered his downfall. I'm not into the downfall, but I'm very interested in the dirt. I bought all the scandalous materials Joel had for a sum of money. Gotta admit, he was thorough. He provided not just photos, but also videos. I stared at these materials for nearly 2 hours until my eyes were sore and my stomach was growling, rubbing my temples. I realized that even though I had no appetite, I couldn't neglect myself. Just after hanging up the hotel phone, my mobile rang. It was Susan at 7:27 p.m., her usual time to get home after work. I didn't answer and hung up directly. She didn't call again. This was Seuss. After hanging up on Susan, I called my lawyer, Martin. "Mr. Bill, what can I do for you?" "Draft a divorce agreement for me. I need it by tomorrow." He seemed stunned and didn't reply for a while. I thought there was a problem with the call. "Hello? Martin?" He finally responded. "What did you say? Whose divorce agreement?" I chuckled. Did he think I was asking him to draft someone else's divorce agreement? Mine, between Susan and me. This time, Martin reacted quickly. "All right, I understand. How do you want to divide the property?" I said, "What's mine remains mine. What's hers remains hers. I don't want any of the joint assets." Although Susan and I had our separate businesses, we also had considerable joint assets accumulated over the years, various investments and collections. If we were to divide them, it wouldn't be quick. Martin asked, "So you want to leave with nothing?" Leave with nothing. I didn't like the sound of that. "Then make it so she takes nothing of the joint assets. They're all mine. Susan has enough generosity to accept this." "All right, I'll draft it right away and send it to you." Martin was efficient. He finished it in half an hour and sent it to me directly. I was amazed at that speed. I hadn't even finished my meal. I decided I'd give Martin a big bonus at the end of the year. After finishing my meal, I was ready to go downstairs to print out the divorce agreement and develop those photos. Just as I opened the door, a shadow appeared, startling me. Looking closely, it was Susan. Her brows were tightly knitted and her face was dark. I wasn't surprised by her arrival. She's a person with a strong sense of propriety. As long as I'm still her husband, she wouldn't just let me go. Since I didn't answer her call, she'd definitely come to find me. "Why didn't you come home?" she asked in a low tone. I said, "Perfect timing. Come in and sit for a while. I have something to tell you." Saying that, I was about to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To print some documents." "I'll go with you?" I pushed her away and looked at her sternly. "No need. Wait here." I let out a long breath as I entered the elevator, tightening my trembling hands and muttered to myself, "Pathetic." When I returned with the printed documents, Susan was sitting properly on the sofa. She was always so meticulous, like a robot without emotions. But today, after seeing those photos, I knew that wasn't true. The divorce agreement was in my hand. I didn't take it out but asked her, "A friend of mine said they saw you at the hospital today. Are you feeling unwell?" I was still hoping Susan would tell me she was pregnant, but she just glanced up briefly, then looked down again. She said, "They must have been mistaken. I didn't go to the hospital." The hope that was hanging by a thread finally shattered. All right. There were 2 copies of the divorce agreement. I signed my name on both and handed one to Susan. Susan took it, confused, when she saw the words on the document. Her expression changed dramatically. She looked up at me in disbelief. "Divorce? You want to divorce me?" I nodded. "Yes." Susan stared at me intensely while I calmly met her gaze. After a while, she threw the document on the table. "Why'd you do that?" I took out the printed photos and tossed them in front of her. The top photo was of her and Mike standing on the rooftop, looking out into the distance. The photo perfectly captured them gazing into each other's eyes and smiling. Susan looked through the photos one by one. Her expression remained calm and composed, her hands steady. I let out a bitter laugh, comparing her reaction to mine. The difference was stark. "Did you spy on me?" After looking through the photos, Susan's eyes flashed with annoyance and hidden anger. I laughed in frustration. "So after seeing all this, your only thought is to blame me. Susan, you've really shown me your ability to deflect. But just to clarify, I didn't follow you. Someone else took these, and I paid for them. Any problems? Want to sue me for invading your privacy?" "If so, go ahead." Susan's brows furrowed tightly. "That's not what I mean." Mike and I are just colleagues. There's nothing between us. If it's about him, there's no need. Ha, I scoffed. Of course I know. There's no holding hands, no hugging, no kissing, no sex, but so what? Am I, Bill, such a fool that I need to wait until it gets worse and my face is slapped before I react? Sorry, my bottom line isn't that low. Susan's eyes were cold as she stepped closer to react. Sorry, my bottom line isn't that low. Susan's eyes were cold as she stepped closer. Bill, what are you playing at? I told you there's nothing between us. What more do you want? I frowned and stepped back. Don't you understand? I said, I want a divorce. I can't live with someone who might cheat on me at any moment. Susan's expression turned exasperated as she yelled, Bill, stop this nonsense. Pack your things and come home with me. I can pretend none of this happened. I lost my temper too. Pretend none of this happened. Why should I? You act self-righteous despite what you've done. Divorce. Divorce. I want a divorce. Right now, shut up. Susan raised her voice. Bill, I don't want to hear that word again. You're not a child. You need to be responsible for what you say. Her words made me furious. Responsible. How dare she say those two words to me? I rushed over and pulled out one of the photos. In the photo, Susan was eating the buns Mike had bought her, holding a cup of soy milk. The date on the photo was just 2 days ago. I get up early every morning to grind coffee and make sandwiches for you. I never sleep in. I treat you well. And yet when someone tosses you a bone, you think it's the best thing in the world. Do you even know what's good for you? My chest heaved. Talking to me about responsibility. Susan, are you even qualified? This was probably the first time Susan had ever been scolded like this. She looked at me with eyes that could almost eat me alive. But I didn't care. I only felt completely satisfied. Susan looked at me deeply. Are you sure you want a divorce? I handed her the divorce agreement and a pen, showing my resolve through my actions. Susan's expression changed several times before she finally signed the divorce agreement with such force that the pen almost tore the paper. She didn't even glance at the contents. I raised an eyebrow, feeling slightly cheated. If I had known, I would have taken her for a lot more. After all, who would mind having more money? Susan stood up, her face dark and full of anger, and left. As she walked away, I reminded her, Bring your ID and household registration book. I'll meet you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow morning. She paused, then walked away without looking back. The next morning, I woke up at dawn. I glanced at the time, 6 o'clock. This timing made me angry. Years of forming a biological clock meant I didn't need an alarm. I just woke up naturally. This instinct reminded me once again that years of genuine affection were wasted. Susan, you really did it. Suppressing my frustration, I buried my head in the pillow, trying to go back to sleep. But no matter what, I couldn't. Annoying, annoying. I tossed and turned in bed for over an hour before reluctantly getting up. After breakfast and getting my things ready, I went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I waited for Susan there for 2 hours. My patience ran out, and she still hadn't shown up. Now I was in a terrible mood. Susan, you are something else. Driving straight to Susan's company, Alex looked like he was facing a great enemy when he saw me. Sir, the president is in a meeting. Would you like to wait in the office? I must have looked terrible. Not wanting to trouble him, I went straight to Susan's office. Just as I sat down, there was a knock on the door and Mike walked in. He was indeed good-looking, with chiseled features and a clean, sunny demeanor. He had an air of being untouched by the world. Sir, here's your coffee. I raised an eyebrow. You're delivering coffee? Are you a secretary? Mike frowned. I'm just doing a favor for someone. Are you that free, Mr. Wan? Why are you being so aggressive? I'm just helping someone out. Helping someone out? Indeed. A programming department intern running errands in the secretary's office. Are you neglecting your duties? Or is he… Mr. Wan. Mike firmly placed the coffee down. I know you have issues with me, but… Wait, I interrupted. This is our second meeting. Why would I have issues with you? Why must I have issues with you? Mike looked stubborn. I know you mind my interactions with Susan, but we are just friends. As her husband, you shouldn't deprive her of the right to make friends. I nodded. A friend who brings her breakfast, makes her lunch, eats with her, freely enters her office, interferes with other departments' work, and roams around during working hours. Is this all part of the special privileges she gave you? Mike, we're both men. We both know what your actions mean. Isn't that right, Susan? Mike spun around. Upon seeing Susan, he immediately put on a look of extreme restraint, pretending to be strong. Susan's face was grim. Mike looked at her with earnest eyes, but she didn't even spare him a glance. Walking straight to my side, she grabbed my hand. What's going on? It was only then that I noticed the stinging pain in my hand. Looking down, I saw a patch of red where the coffee had splashed. Seeing Susan's seemingly concerned expression, I felt a bit disheartened. I pulled my hand away from her grasp. I don't need you to care. Susan's face darkened. What exactly is going on? Mike looked humiliated. It's all my fault. I accidentally spilled the coffee just now. Susan then turned to Mike. All right, you can leave now? Mike glanced at Susan, then stubbornly turned and left. Alex, go buy some burn ointment. Okay. Susan, manager, I'll go right away. I scoffed. What's this? Playing out a scene from The Cowherd and the Weaver Girl? Making me look like the villain who's breaking up a pair of lovers? Susan glared at me. Bill, what do you really want? Making a scene in public? I looked at her expressionlessly. What, seeing me bully your little lover? Feeling heartbroken? But what can I do? I still hold the title of your husband, and I have some right to discipline any mistresses who come up. If you really cared about your little lover, you shouldn't have stood me up. I waited for you at the Civil Affairs Bureau for 2 hours. Where were you? No show, no call. Is your time the only time that matters? Who the hell doesn't have millions at stake every minute? Susan's face grew darker. Civil Affairs Bureau? Why were you at the Civil Affairs Bureau? I looked at her in disbelief. Why at the Civil Affairs Bureau? Affairs Bureau. I looked at her in disbelief. Why at the Civil Affairs Bureau? For a tour. Of course, for the divorce. Did you think signing the divorce agreement yesterday was just for fun? Susan stared at me, her breathing becoming more rapid. Suddenly, she collapsed backward uncontrollably. My heart tightened, and I quickly caught her. Susan shook her head, looking very uncomfortable. What's wrong with you? Ignoring my question, she pushed me away and dry-heaved a couple of times. Is this morning sickness? I gritted my teeth and asked again, What's wrong with you? Susan looked up at me, her face pale, but her gaze was icy cold. You want a divorce, right? Fine, let's get divorced. I laughed. This was the answer I wanted, and even now, it's what I wanted. But I felt a deep sadness, emotions surging from the depths of my heart. My eyes grew hot, and tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Susan was stunned. You're crying. I took a deep breath. You're so wrong. Susan's lips trembled. Bill, we need to talk. In these 25 years of my life with Susan, there was never a moment we were apart. But because of the 3-year age gap, it always felt like I was waiting for her. When she was 3, I was 6. When she started kindergarten, I went to elementary school. When she was 6, I was 9. Just as she started elementary school, my classroom moved from the West Campus to the East Campus. When she was 10, I was 13. Just when she moved to the East Campus, I moved to the West Campus for a year. I went to middle school when she started middle school. I went to high school when she started high school. I went to college when she finally got into my college. I had already started interning in the real world. So, how should I put it? A 3-year age gap is a real hurdle. But even so, I was with her throughout her years of college. In college, I confessed to her. She accepted, and we were together. At that time, I rented an apartment outside of school and Susan moved in with me. Back then, I was already very busy, and the rented place was far from my company. But even so, I would come back to our little home every day. Susan would be there waiting for me. No matter what, I always had to go back. I loved her, and I thought she loved me too. Sitting in the quiet private room, Susan was carefully looking at the menu. My gaze wandered to the side. I'm willing to land on her. She asked me, "What do you want to eat?" Not wanting to mistreat myself, I ordered a few light dishes and then stopped. Susan gave me a strange look but didn't say anything. She added 2 more dishes and handed the menu back to the waiter, signaling him to leave. As soon as the waiter left, she suddenly got up and sat next to me, catching me off guard. She grabbed my hand. I was startled and instinctively tried to pull away, but Susan stopped me. "Don't move. What are you doing?" Susan lowered her head and looked at my hand. "Don't move. I'm applying medicine." Her voice was a bit hoarse, making my heart ache slightly. She pulled out a tube of ointment from her pocket. "I can do it myself." Saying this, I reached for the ointment in her hand. But Susan dodged and said, "Let me do it." "No, I'll do it myself." "Bill." Susan was angry. My hand paused in midair and then dropped weakly. "Forget it. We've already seen each other naked. What's the point of being pretentious now?" I turned my head away, not wanting to look. After a while, a cool sensation spread over my hand. Along with the softness of Susan's fingertips, my heart trembled slightly. "Bill, do you really want a divorce?" I didn't realize when Susan had returned to her seat across from me, hearing her question. I nodded. "Yes, just because of those photos." "Yes." Susan took a deep breath, frustrated and trying to suppress her emotions. She said, "Mike and I haven't done anything inappropriate. Not before, not now, and not in the future. What are you really upset about? It's just a normal superior-subordinate relationship. You work too. Don't you understand?" It was really hard for Susan to repeat such pointless words over and over again. "Susan." I looked up at her. "Why don't you sit next to me? Why do you always sit across from me?" Susan frowned, looking confused as if she didn't understand the meaning of my words. Or perhaps she had never considered the question. I said, "From the age of 3 until now, 22 years. Let's count 300 days a year. That's 6,600 days. Rounded down to 6,000 days. Assuming 1 meal a day, we've had at least 6,000 meals together. In these 6,000 meals, you've never sat next to me. Always across from me. Just like earlier. Even though you sat beside me to apply medicine, you still returned to the seat across from me. Look at the distance between us, at least a meter, but with him you can sit side by side. What was the distance then? 5 centimeters or 0? Susan froze for a moment, then stood up awkwardly. I raised my hand to stop her. "Don't come over. It was just an accident in the office. The only table where you can eat is that one, and it can't—" I didn't let her finish and interrupted her directly. "Do you remember when we were in college? We lived in Yicheng apartments. Every morning before work, I would get up to make you breakfast. At first, I didn't know how to cook, so I could only heat up milk and cook plain rice porridge. But you can't eat that every day, so I learned to cook. When I wasn't busy, I would try making various breakfasts at home. Dumplings, some milk, fried dough sticks, wontons, noodles. Later, I even started making egg-filled pancakes and janbing wosi at home. Back then, breakfast was all I could make for you. You waited at home for me, and I wanted to make sure you ate well in the morning. But you didn't have an appetite in the morning. I could tell you were struggling to eat what I made. So, I simplified the breakfasts again. The only breakfast you could completely finish in the morning was a sandwich. Triangular slices of toast, a soft-boiled egg with a bit of pepper, slices of luncheon meat, and a piece of lettuce. The most important thing was that you didn't want any sauce. You probably didn't even realize this yourself, but I figured it out from making you breakfast day after day. As for the hand-ground coffee, You don't like milk because it makes you bloated. You don't like soy milk because you can't stand the texture. But coffee with milk? You can drink it very comfortably. Snap! Don't I know that drinking coffee in the morning is bad for the stomach? But you like it. And have you ever had an upset stomach from drinking coffee in the morning? Susan, do you know what the soup you drink every night is? It's to nourish your stomach. I've nurtured your stomach day by day so that you can drink your favorite coffee in the morning. And even if you skip a meal or two, you won't get a stomachache. It's not for you to eat junk food. Susan's expression was grim. Her mouth opened and closed. And finally, she looked at me intently and said, "It won't happen again. Never again." I shook my head. There's no never again, Susan. The smile you show him is a smile you've never shown me. Not even when we took our wedding photos. During our wedding photo shoot, you had the same expression the whole time. Later, I overheard the staff gossiping. They said, "This woman must have been forced into marriage. Look at her. Not a single smile from start to finish. She seems very unhappy." I wasn't unhappy. I was just nervous. There was something in Susan's eyes that I couldn't understand, like panic. I shook my head. Impossible. When has Susan ever panicked? I rubbed my temples, which were starting to ache. Susan walked up to me, knelt down on one knee, and held my hand. She looked at me seriously. She was way more serious than when she first agreed to marry me. "I'm moving Mike to another branch office, and we won't see each other again," she declared. Maybe I didn't set the right boundaries between us, but believe me, I just admire his outlook on life and work. Nothing beyond that. "You've got feelings for him," I insisted. Susan frowned. "I don't." Her voice was rock solid, no second thoughts. I shook my head. "You're into him." Susan's face got more tense. "This is my heart speaking." I said no. That's it. I pulled my hand back. Her expression turned icy as she stared at me without any emotion. "Look, I know you too well. Over the years, tons of guys have tried to get close to you, but you always ignored them. But this guy's different. He's made you break your rules too many times. He's been part of your life for 25 years. That's true love, you know? I'm just a businessman. If an investment is about to tank me, I'll cut my losses to minimize the fallout. Susan, you have feelings for someone else. That's why I don't want you anymore." Susan turned down my divorce request, which I kinda saw coming. After all, Susan isn't the type to make rash or emotional moves. Just like in the books, even in the end, she didn't act impulsively or emotionally. She ended up not divorced, only widowed. Thinking about it made me shiver. Susan wouldn't want to kill me, right? I shook my head. It shouldn't be that drastic. I get most plot twists in books, except one. Susan bringing down the Wong family. That's not her style. If the Wong family were to fall, at worst, Susan would help out. The real issues must be within the Wong family itself. Seems like I need to do a deep dive into the company. After our talk, Susan seemed lost. She just said, "I won't divorce you. We'll stay together." I felt I made myself clear and was too drained to say more. After all, I'm not her emotional guru. It's not my job to help her sort out her feelings. I stood up and walked away. She grabbed me. "Where are you going?" I replied, "Home." She didn't let go. "Which home?" "City." She seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Wait for me at home. I'll handle everything." I shrugged, not really caring. City was where we lived after tying the knot. She probably thought I was making a compromise by going home. But I didn't tell her I was just going back to pack my stuff. When I got to City with a team of professional organizers, the housekeeper, Sophia, was stunned. At first glance, it might have looked like we were seizing the house. "Sophia, what's up?" I said. "Moving out. It might have seemed like we were taking over the place." Sophia looked confused. "Sir, what are you doing?" I answered, "We're moving out." Without waiting for more questions, I started giving orders. "Take down all the photos and paintings from the walls." "Yes, sir." "Pack up all the men's stuff in the second floor dressing room." "Yes, sir." Move the entire bookshelf from the master bedroom upstairs. Yes, sir. Clear out and throw away all the carpets. Yes, sir. Uproot the ginkgo tree outside. Yes, sir. Everyone else, clean the whole house and remove anything manly. Yes, sir. I came in with a big crew and left the same way. Sophia tried a few times to approach me, but my chill vibe kept her at bay. She works for Susan and gets paid by her. Once I'm gone, we're done. No need for small talk. After leaving city, I didn't head home but went to another property I owned. Mr. Wong and Mrs. Lee were still traveling and hadn't come back. No need to bother them. Besides, I was set on the divorce and didn't want any more advice. After leaving, I blocked all of Susan's contacts and went straight to the office. For the next week, I practically lived at work, going over all contracts and accounts. Sure enough, I found a glitch. The company's CFO had secretly set up a shell company for tax evasion. It would have been bad enough if he embezzled all the money himself, but he moved a bit to my father's account as supposed dividends. Damn, he's slick. Not only did he break the law, but he also tried to pin it on my dad. Oh no, it's my dad. This CFO was a company old-timer, my dad's best buddy, who fought alongside him for years and took care of me. It was shocking to realize that the wolf biting your neck was right next to you. But it makes sense. If Susan can change, why not anyone else? Finding the root cause, I handed it over to Martin, my lawyer. What should we do about this? As law-abiding citizens, we'll handle it legally. During this hectic week, a few people reached out to me, but 3 stood out. Susan, Mike, and Joel. I didn't see Susan. She tried to force her way in, but I called the cops. I didn't see Mike either. Do I have time to chat with you, mistress? As for Joel, he's quite the character. A quirky guy who could turn into a shady pawn. For some reason, he saw me as his boss and started spilling all the tea about Mike and Susan. Mr. Bill, today Susan wants to move Mike out of the main company, he texted. He stormed into the office to argue with her, said he'd quit if she did that. Susan just told him to finish his handover. Manager Wong, Mike's heading to the branch company. But after all the drama, he didn't leave. With such sweet perks at Shencorp, who'd want a dip? Mike was bringing Susan breakfast again today, but she didn't take it. Whether you want it or not is your business, but I gotta keep my promise. In the end, Susan didn't eat it and tossed it in the trash. Well done. His stuff belongs in the trash, but something felt off. A promise? What promise? I needed to dig deeper. Turns out, a month ago Mike had appendicitis and Susan took him to the hospital. I grabbed my phone and checked Joel's latest message. Mike went to the rooftop again to coincidentally meet Susan. That's Susan's private spot. None of us dare go up there, but he treats it like his own backyard. I was speechless. Aren't you scared of your salary getting docked for being so idle? Joel was hyped. Manager Wong, you finally hit me back. Don't stress, I've got all of Susan's moves on lock. Want to see pics? I'll send them. Nah, number 1. Thanks, Joel. I'm divorcing Susan. You don't need to send me anything about her and Mike anymore. Joel, Manager Wong, please. Losing to you is one thing, but losing to Mike is embarrassing. I laughed. Then maybe you can step into his shoes. But Joel's pretty scheming, so I wouldn't dare. That's Susan. I doubt she even remembers my name. What's up? Think you can't match up to Mike? Joel, how should I put it? We're just regular folks, while he's like some white lotus fairy. Tsk, I don't get Susan's taste. The more I think about it, the more annoyed I get. Joel's words cracked me up. You free tonight? Let me take you out to dinner. Joel replied instantly, I'm down. I'll sort everything out for you. We set up to meet at Alicia's Western restaurant. When she saw me, she was surprised. Did you come alone? Didn't Susan come with you? I was more shocked. When has she ever come with me? Alicia laughed awkwardly and left. Chatting with Joel was fun. He was straight up and easy to vibe with. But life's full of twists and turns. Like, Mike happened to work part-time at this Western spot. When he saw me, he tried to hide, but then suddenly stood up straight. Seeing him, Joel rolled his eyes. Oh, he's trying to pull some act again? Mike looked pissed. You should ask Mr. Bill. I was confused. What did I do? I waved him over. Come here and tell me, what did I do to you? Mike's eyes were full of anger. Mr. Bill, if there's been a misunderstanding between me and Susan, that's stressing you out. I can explain. But don't take it out on my parents. Isn't that over the top, Mike? I'm giving you a chance to speak, so don't play games with me. Holding me accountable? You're not qualified. Just as I finished, Susan rushed in, wearing a light gray suit I had bought her. A misstep. I thought I had everything covered, but forgot about the stuff I got her. Should have taken those too. I laughed. Looks like I spoke too soon. Apparently you are qualified. See? Your backer's here. Mike turned around, looking at Susan happily. But Susan didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were locked on mine, not leaving for a second. I saw she looked worn out, thinner, with a hint of sadness in her eyes. Here to back up your little lover? Why didn't you see me? I put on a cold face, not wanting to waste time on this pointless talk. I turned to Mike. I know you've been trying to find me these past few days. I'll give you one last shot. Say what you need to say. Mike looked at Susan with hopeful eyes, but seeing she wouldn't respond, he looked at me with shame. Mr. Bill, why did you fire my parents? They worked hard at Wong's for years. How could you just let them go? What did they do wrong? Is it just a coincidence? Mike's parents worked at my company? This really messed things up for the original bad wife. Mike, you've watched too many romantic dramas. Do you know how many people work at my company? Thousands. Who are your parents that I'd personally fire them? Even if their firing wasn't related to me, what if it was because of me? Do you think I run a big company and have so much money just for charity? Number one, it's for my own satisfaction. As the top decision maker, don't I have the right to fire a few bad apples? Susan, don't I? I gave Susan a cold look. She looked back and said, Come home with me. I've got everything back. It'll be like before. Come home with me. Me? What? Mike was pissed. On what grounds do you say my parents had bad conduct? Because they raised a son with bad conduct. Mike's face turned red. Mr. Bill, you're too much. Just 'cause you have money and power, you think you can bully people. What did I do? How can you say that about me? I was just grateful to Susan for taking me to the hospital. I bought her breakfast and made her lunch out of gratitude. What did I do wrong? I nodded, pretending to understand. I get it. I understand. I glanced at Joel, who was watching the drama unfold with excitement. If you had appendicitis, would you call Susan? Joel shook his head vigorously. Do I not have a phone? Wouldn't I call 911? Don't I have parents? They'd be the first I'd call. Don't I have friends? Am I that pitiful? If things got worse, I could crawl out and knock on the neighbor's door. Mike's face went from green to white. And even if I did call Susan, at most she'd call 911 for me. My words hit hard, each one a precise jab. But Mike's face showed a flicker of hope. Susan didn't look at him. She said, It won't happen again. I felt indifferent. Mike, don't get discouraged. Once I'm done divorcing Susan, you can take your place. For now, be patient. Don't give me a chance to finish you off. Susan clenched her teeth and grabbed my hand. We're not getting divorced. Not now, not ever. There's no one else. Only you. What's the point of saying these things now? I tried to pull my hand away, but she wouldn't let go. I didn't mean to push her off, just a little shove, and she stumbled, hitting the edge of the table. Her face instantly went pale as she clutched her stomach protectively. She held my arm tight. Da baby, Bill, our baby. Did I want a baby? The answer was yes. Before I brought out the divorce papers, I always hoped Susan would tell me she was pregnant. I thought if she said it, I'd forgive her. It wouldn't matter if she liked Mike or had feelings for him as long as she wanted to keep our baby. We could start fresh, but she never said it. Even as we went through the divorce, she never mentioned it. I thought she had already terminated the pregnancy, but now she says she's carrying our baby. Susan lay on the hospital bed, gripping my hand tightly. I didn't pull away. Honestly, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained. The doctor said, "You have symptoms of a threatened miscarriage, but you're physically okay. The issue isn't severe. Stay in the hospital for a few days to protect the pregnancy, then rest up, stay positive, and avoid any more stress." I nodded. "Thank you." After the doctor left, a nurse came to adjust the drip. It was slow. Neither of us said a word. After a while, Susan spoke up. "I'm pregnant." Her voice was hoarse and rough. Her hand trembled, then she quickly let go. "What did you say?" I looked down at her, and Susan's eyes instantly welled up. "I'm pregnant, our baby, and you're asking me, even if I'm pregnant, you still want to divorce me?" I struggled to breathe. "Our child. Didn't you decide not to keep it? How could it be our child?" Susan shook her head. "No," I interrupted her. "When did you find out you were pregnant? Why didn't you tell me? If you didn't want a divorce, why didn't you say anything?" Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hands gripped the bed tightly. I let out a sarcastic laugh. "Can't answer? Let me guess. It's because you never planned to keep it. So why use it as leverage?" A long silence followed. Susan spoke again, her voice choking with emotion. "Bill, can we not get divorced? Please." I shook my head firmly. "No." Susan's breathing got heavier. "I'll keep the baby. We won't get divorced." "Susan," I shouted, "don't use the baby as a bargaining chip." Susan cried. "I didn't handle my relationship with Mike well. It won't happen again. Let's start over, please." A bit of pain hit my heart, and I sighed. "Others can, but you can't. Because you're Susan." Susan looked confused. "For so many years, the only man you've publicly acknowledged as a friend is Mike, right? Even those we grew up with didn't have that honor." "Yes, now you're just friends. But what about the future?" "Susan, ask yourself, if I hadn't pushed this to a divorce, if I had just argued with you or even threatened you, what would you've done? You'd find me annoying, think I'm petty, think I'm unreasonable. You'd keep saying we're just friends. The worst part is people like you, hiding behind the guise of just friends, doing shady things, and then blaming me if something happens. You'd say it was my fault. Why not cut it off at the source? A rotten piece of flesh should just be cut off." Susan shook her head slowly, looking at me pleadingly. "Bill, you can't do this. You can't leave me over things that haven't happened. These are just your assumptions. They won't and can't happen." I rubbed my temples. "Do you know about risk assessment?" Susan stiffened. "What about our relationship? Our 25 years together? Are you just going to throw it all away so easily? We're having a child. We'll get better." "Bill, you still love me. You still love me." It seemed that love was her last hope, the confidence I had given her. I interrupted her. "Susan, do you love me?" Susan looked at me and for the first time directly answered my question. "Bill, I love you," I scoffed. "You can do shady things while loving me, so if I want to divorce you while loving you, what's the problem?" Susan's face turned pale. She looked at me desperately, eyes like someone drowning in despair. I turned away, not wanting to look at her anymore. "Susan, I'm giving you a week to think about it." "What about our child?" "As you wish. If you want to keep the baby, I'll support it. If not, I can help with the surgery." My words were cold and heartless, hurting both her and myself. A dull thud sounded behind me, followed by Susan's fierce roar. "Bill!" Susan stayed in the hospital for a week, causing a commotion. She refused to eat properly, refused to cooperate with treatment unless I was there. Caregivers and doctors kept calling me with excuses. I thought, thank goodness her parents didn't know, otherwise they'd have come over. But I wasn't completely heartless. I visited when I had to. I brought her meals when needed, but I didn't say any unnecessary words. Susan also fell silent until one day she suddenly said, "Bill, I'm really scared. When you act like this, I feel like you're drifting further and further away. I didn't know what to say. 22 years of feelings. I'm not a robot. Facing her, I felt sad and heartbroken. But each wave of sadness and heartbreak reminded me it was all her fault. She was the one who first ignored our 22 years together. I kept replaying this process in my mind. 1,000 arrows through the heart. Just like that. And then there's the child. What are you planning to do? Susan caressed her belly. What if I say I want to keep the baby? I'll pay child support and take care of it. Susan looked at me with teary eyes. Bill, during pregnancy and breastfeeding, as long as I don't agree, you can't divorce me. Yes, that's right, but the baby will eventually be born and grow up. Susan, let's stop forcing things. What if I insist on forcing it? This version of Susan made me sad. I gently brushed her bangs aside. Then we might not part on good terms. Susan choked up. Bill, you're too cruel. You gave me confidence with 25 years. You made me mistakenly believe that everyone might leave me, but not you. Now, you're abandoning me without hesitation, leaving no room for reconciliation. Her sobs made my heart hurt, but only for a moment. Let's just consider it my mistake. Susan shook her head. No, it's all my fault. I was wrong. She looked at me with red eyes. Bill, if you could do it all over again, would you still be with me? The question made me pause. Looking back at those 22 years, I had been there for her, and she had been there for me. Yes. Susan stared at me dazedly. Susan, I'm 28 this year. You've been a part of my entire life. You've always been there for me, no matter what happened. You were the first person by my side. You didn't miss any stage of my life. You witnessed everything about me. You didn't miss any stage of my life. You saw everything about me. Susan, falling in love with you was inevitable. I can't deny the past 22 years because of current mistakes. Likewise, I can't accept the current mistakes because of the past 22 years. What should we do, Susan? Tell me. What should we do? Tears silently fell from my eyes. Susan stared at me. A painful cry escaped her lips. For the first time, she truly realized what she had done wrong. With a hoarse voice, she said, Bill, I agree to the divorce. Without any arguments over assets, my divorce from Susan went smoothly. Looking at the freshly issued divorce certificate, I let out a long breath. I felt both a sense of loss and relief. Do I hate Susan? It didn't seem that bad, but as long as she was my wife, the things she did would stay as a thorn in my side. Only by shedding that title could I truly move on. What is this called? Let's call it self-rescue for now. I took Susan back home. I stopped at the door. This is as far as I go. Susan looked very worn out. Bill, will you come see me in the future? I should. After all, there's still the child. Susan decided to keep the baby. I didn't think it was a smart move, but the baby was in her belly. I couldn't take away her right. I turned and left, leaving Susan standing there. Mr. Wong and Mrs. Lee had returned from their trip. Seeing me, Mrs. Lee was thrilled. Son, have you lost weight? Lost weight. That's good. Mr. Wong came downstairs. Where's Susan? Why didn't she come back with you? We're divorced. I didn't mean to hide it from them. I handed them the divorce certificate. Mr. Wong glared at me. What's going on with you? Such a big deal. Why didn't you discuss it with us? Do you even consider us your parents? Mrs. Lee slapped him hard. Why are you scolding our son? Given how he was with Susan, if it wasn't absolutely necessary, she didn't finish her sentence. I lowered my eyes, letting out a sarcastic laugh. See, everyone knows how deeply I love Susan. Mrs. Lee suddenly stepped forward, stood on the tiptoe to hug me, gently stroking my hair. It's okay, as long as you're back. Smelling the familiar fruity scent on Mrs. Lee, my nose tingled and tears streamed down my face, full of grievances, anger, and desolation. I thought, let me be a kid one more time. Let me cry one more time. for the last time. Come tomorrow, I'll be the elegant, all-powerful young mister again. From as far back as she could remember, Susan had a big brother who could do anything. His name was Bill, and he was especially handsome. Susan is the prettiest in the world. She's obedient and cute. I like Susan the most. But Susan knew she was actually quite bossy and held grudges. When she was 8, Bill fell in love with Lego. He could sit quietly and build all day. Susan didn't like it. Well, not that she hated it, but she was only 5 and didn't know how to build. But Bill didn't mind. He'd build Lego and give Susan a storybook to read while she lay beside him. Often, Susan would fall asleep reading. When that happened, Bill would stop what he was doing and cover her with a blanket. One day, a girl came to visit with her mom, seeing the Lego. The girl wanted to play too. Susan wasn't happy, but Bill agreed and decided to play with her mom. Susan got angry and walked away. Bill chased after her. "Susan, what's wrong?" he asked. She pouted. "I don't want you playing with others." Bill agreed without hesitation. "Okay, I won't play with others, only with you, but you can't play with others either." "Okay?" Susan remembered nodding. She even made a pinky promise with Bill. They promised each other from a young age. Bill kept his promise. Susan forgot hers. How could she forget? How could she? A friend said, "You're just used to Bill being around. You'll get over it. After all, you don't love him." Susan thought this was the most ridiculous thing ever. She threw her cup to the ground and growled, "I love him. I love Bill. I only love Bill." But why? Even her best friend thought she didn't love Bill. Bill had always been the center of attention. No matter where he was, he always caught everyone's eye. She didn't like the way people looked at Bill. So, like claiming ownership, she'd throw her school bag to Bill. But even so, she couldn't always be by Bill's side. At that time, Susan was a high school freshman and Bill was already in college. Although they were in the same city, the distance between them grew. One day, she saw a photo, a group chat, a path covered with flowers, dotted with candlelight, a shy girl blocking Bill's way. That was the first time Susan felt panicked. She rushed out of class and ran back. That was the first time she skipped class. But standing outside Bill's school, she didn't know what to do. Her mother once sighed, "You have to speak up." He happily hugged her. The warmth made Susan blush and her heart race. She hurriedly pushed him away, embarrassed. "What are you doing?" Bill didn't mind. He looked at Susan with a grin. "Did you come back because you saw the photo? Are you jealous?" Without waiting for Susan to answer, Bill continued, "Don't worry, I won't be with anyone else. I've already rejected her. I'm going to be Susan's boyfriend." Hearing this, Susan's heart settled. Bill was always like this, giving her all the security she needed. Susan couldn't help but call Bill to tell him she loved him and had loved him since then. Bill was silent for a while. "Do you remember how you answered me?" How could Susan forget? After hearing Bill's words, she said, "What photo? I don't know. I came with a classmate to buy something, just happened to pass by." Susan's grip on the phone tightened. "No, I was just with a classmate to buy something, just happened to pass by." Susan's grip on the phone tightened. "No, I was just too embarrassed to tell you." Bill interrupted her. "Susan, do you really think it was an accident that you saw that photo? Without my consent, who would send such a photo to a group you're in?" At that time, she was in university and they were drifting apart. "I was scared. I was scared you'd fall for someone else, that you wouldn't wait for me. I desperately wanted to prove you loved me. So, even knowing someone was going to confess to me, I still went. From the moment that photo was sent, I kept waiting. I waited from the afternoon until the evening. I was so happy you showed up. At that moment, I felt like I had the whole world." Bill's words tore at Susan's heart. "Bill, we can stay in touch. Talk about work, life, and the child. But let's not talk about love, okay? You say you love me, but I've spent so many years trying to prove your love for me." "Susan, I'm tired." May 14th. Susan hasn't been sleeping well lately. Her belly is getting bigger and her nerves are fraying. Everyone's telling her to terminate the pregnancy, but Susan refuses. She's scared. She's scared that without this child, she and Bill would have no connection at all. Just like the villa in City a city without Bill feels suffocating. The city as she once knew it is now just a cold building, but Bill made it come alive, gave it warmth. The carpets on the floor, the paintings on the walls, the vases on the tables, the stickers on the fridge, the cushions on the sofa, the decorations on the shelves, and the ginkgo tree outside. All those details she once ignored now felt like nails piercing her heart. It hurt so much. Standing on the balcony, she could just see Bill's house. Even though she couldn't see Bill, she felt like she could breathe under the same sky. On those sleepless nights, she couldn't see Bill. She felt like she could breathe under the same sky. On those sleepless nights, she questioned herself countless times. Why did she let her relationship with Bill come to this point? They used to be so harmonious and happy. Susan squinted her eyes slightly. She remembered their college days. She remembered when Bill confessed his love to her. That day was very ordinary. Bill was playing basketball with his classmates in the gym and insisted that Susan come watch. Susan sat in the stands, surrounded by many other girls. But every time Bill turned his head, he always locked his eyes on Susan first. His gaze was intense, and he had a smile on his face. After the game, he went to the locker room to change. Susan intended to follow him to tell him she was leaving, but Bill suddenly put his jacket over her head and pulled her in. Susan poked her head out from under the jacket. Bill's big jacket loosely draped over her shoulders, covering her legs. Bill lowered his head, looking at her with those star-filled eyes. "Little girl, do you want to date? The kind that ends in marriage?" Susan could still remember how she felt at that moment. Her heart raced, her body trembled. She wanted to hug him. She wanted to kiss him. Who could resist such bright eyes? Okay. She thought she could always be protected by those eyes, but in the end, it was she who dimmed their light. Those 4 years in college were the best years of her life. She and Bill lived together. The house wasn't big, but it was warm. Every morning, Bill would make her breakfast and give her a good morning kiss. He'd smile and say, "Girlfriend, stay home and wait for me to come back and support you." Every night, no matter how late, Susan would sit on the sofa waiting for him. He'd always hug her, rubbing his furry, stubbly head against her shoulder and say, "Girlfriend, thanks for waiting." Bill always gave Susan all his love. But what did Susan give Bill? Neglect, indifference, and lack of response. Maybe it was because Bill was too good to her. From childhood to adulthood, she never had to ask for anything. Bill would do everything for her. He'd remind Susan to study hard, urge her to sleep early and wake up early, and protect her from any harm. Once, Bill muttered, "I didn't find a girlfriend. I found an ancestor." How did she react then? She got angry. She was unhappy. She spoke coldly, "If you don't want to do it, then don't. It's not like I asked you to." And every time, Bill would back down. How could I not? Of course I want to. I want to the most. Susan's heart trembled. She realized she had never given Bill any warmth. No wonder Bill didn't want her anymore. Just like Bill said, she never even smiled at him much. So what had she been doing all these years? Susan remembered her wedding to Bill. On their wedding day, Susan was very nervous, more so than when she first negotiated a business deal. Because she was nervous, her face was tense the entire time. She heard people whispering, suspecting the bride was being forced into marriage. Susan scoffed, thinking they were crazy. If I didn't want to get married, who could force me? She thought Bill would be as certain as she was, but didn't expect him to be hurt by those words. If time could turn back, she would rush into the dressing room and grab Bill's arms. She'd tell everyone that he was the man she loved deeply. But there are no ifs in life. What's missed is missed. Bill gave her deep certainty, but she gave him doubt. She deserved it. She hadn't realized her different attitude toward Mike and had hurt Bill because of it. She admitted she was wrong, but didn't admit she liked Mike. However, she couldn't deny that she had wavered in her marriage because of someone else. After firing Mike, he came to see her. He questioned Susan, "Why are you doing this to me? Clearly, you have feelings for me." Susan retorted, "Do you think I have feelings for you?" Mike nodded confidently. "I can feel it. You're special to me. I know you must like me. Susan, let's be together. You're divorced now. There are no obstacles between us. We can be together properly." Susan felt an intense pain in her heart. The man who had loved her for over 20 years wasn't sure of her love. Yet a man who had been around for less than half a year dared to say such things. What had I done? To what extent had I hurt Bill? "Mike, I don't like you. I didn't before, I don't now, and I won't in the future. If I did anything to give you that impression, I apologize. But if you appear in front of Bill and me again, I won't be polite." Susan's tone was cold as she turned to leave. Behind her, Mike's face was pale and he looked like he might collapse. "Hush, Susan. Do you think you're so great? Do you think you're blameless? If you don't like me, you shouldn't have given off signals that I could approach you. You let me get close. And now you say everything was my misunderstanding. Who do you think you are? You think you can just walk away and say you did nothing wrong?" Susan felt physically and emotionally exhausted, more confused than ever. So this is who she was. So her self-assumed emotions were just this. The news of the divorce eventually reached both families. She was called back home. Her father looked at her with disappointment and shook his head. She had been her parents' pride all her life. Seeing her father look at her like that for the first time made Susan feel suffocated. She ultimately didn't keep the baby. She cried for a long time. Bill came to see her. Susan hid under the covers. She didn't dare face Bill. She hadn't kept their baby. She and Bill had no future anymore. She didn't want the baby. She just felt she was still young and didn't want a child so early. She was trying to spoil it by Bill, indulging in his affection. She felt she didn't need to consult Bill about not wanting the child. Bill would obey her unconditionally, but she was wrong. Her mother once said, "If you like someone, you have to tell them. Love needs to be shown and spoken. No one can keep going without expecting something in return. Don't wait until the love is exhausted to regret." Susan had been sure that Bill's feelings for her were an exception. Now she regretted it. Her mother said, "Don't do this again in the future." Susan cried and laughed and cried. What future is there? She had been so deeply loved by Bill. How could she ever love someone else again?